Warning: do not watch this alone. What you are about to hear is not a ghost story meant to entertain. It is a place that was sealed because something inside refused to stay buried. Highgate Cemetery opened its gates in the 1800s, a grand Victorian final resting place in North London. It was designed as a sanctuary, a place of dignity for the departed, where silence and solemnity would reign. But that peace was short-lived. Instead of a place for quiet remembrance, it quickly became a place people refused to enter after dark. The sprawling, ornate cemetery, with its winding paths and shadowed crypts, held more than just the deceased. Locals were the first to notice the disturbances. Small, unsettling things that didn't add up. Graves that had been neatly tended to one day were found disturbed the next morning, but with no footprints in the surrounding mud. Heavy stone lids on family tombs, weighing several tons, would be found shifted just slightly overnight, as if pushed from within. And then there were the shapes. Dark, fleeting figures, moving between the tombs long after the iron gates were locked for the night. The whispers started then, stories told in hushed tones over flickering candles in nearby pubs. They spoke of a presence in Highgate, something ancient and territorial that did not welcome the living. These weren't just isolated incidents. Caretakers, hardened men who had worked among the dead their entire lives, began to report a pattern of unnerving events. Doors to mausoleums that were locked tight would be found ajar. Fresh flowers left on graves would be scattered and trampled by dawn, yet no animals were ever seen. The feeling of being watched became a constant complaint, a prickling on the back of the neck that signaled an unseen observer. As decades passed, the stories grew darker, more specific. The cemetery, meant to be a place of rest, was becoming a place of fear. The dead, it seemed, were not resting at all. By the mid-1900s, Highgate had fallen into a state of severe disrepair. Entire sections of this once magnificent cemetery were abandoned, left to the mercy of nature. Ivy crawled over angelic statues, choking them. Weeds burst through the stone floors of chapels. The paths became impassable, swallowed by a tangle of thorns and vines. Grand family crypts, once a symbol of wealth and status, were left to rot. Their iron doors rusted open, exposing the darkness within. Officially, the authorities blamed neglect and a lack of funding for the cemetery's decay. It was a simple logical explanation that satisfied the public. But the caretakers, the few who remained, told a different story. They didn't speak of budgets or vandals. They spoke of something else, something that had driven them from the older sections of the grounds. The crunch of gravel behind them would stop the moment they turned around. They spoke of a cold, stale breath on the back of their necks in the dead of winter, even when they were bundled in heavy coats. And most chillingly, they spoke of a sound, a soft, rhythmic scratching and shifting, like the sound of soil being slowly moved. But this sound wasn't coming from the surface. It was coming from below, from inside the graves. This wasn't just a place falling apart. It was a place being taken over. The abandonment wasn't just a matter of finance. It was a retreat. The living were slowly surrendering the territory to whatever it was that dwelled there, something that didn't want them digging, tending, or even walking on its ground. The cemetery wasn't just closing. It was being sealed off by fear. The whispers and quiet fears that had haunted Highgate for decades finally erupted in the 1960s. Suddenly, it wasn't just caretakers and locals sharing hushed stories. The national papers began publishing accounts from credible witnesses, people who had dared to venture near the cemetery's crumbling walls after dark. The reports were shockingly consistent. Witness after witness described a tall, dark figure. It was always seen from a distance, gliding silently between the tombs. It had a human-like form but moved with an unnatural fluidity, and no one could ever make out a face. It was just a black shape against the gray stone, a void in the night. Others reported seeing eyes, pairs of glowing red eyes staring out from the deep shadows inside mausoleums. They would appear for a moment, two burning embers in the pitch black, and then vanish as if a switch had been flipped. But the most disturbing phenomenon was the effect this presence had on animals. Dogs would whine and refuse to go near the cemetery walls. Birds would fall silent. And then came the discoveries. Dead foxes, dozens of them, were found scattered throughout the grounds near the graves. There were never any wounds, no signs of a struggle, no blood. They were just dead, as if the life had been drained right out of them. The atmosphere of fear around Highgate solidified, and locals, drawing on ancient folklore, started to whisper one terrifying word: vampire. While the public was captivated by tales of a vampire, the gravediggers and cemetery workers held on to even darker secrets. These were stories they refused to repeat publicly, truths so disturbing they were only shared among themselves in hushed, trembling voices. They spoke of what they found when they were called to perform exhumations or open old family vaults. Coffins, sealed for a century or more, were found with deep scratch marks on the inside of the lids. Thick oak planks were splintered, and heavy iron nails were bent outward, as if something had been desperately trying to claw its way out. Lids that should have been sealed tight were found cracked, not from age or decay, but from an immense pressure applied from within. One caretaker, a man who had worked at Highgate for over 30 years, shared a story that made him quit that very same night. He was doing a late-night check near an old, dilapidated crypt whose door had rusted off its hinges. As his flashlight beam cut through the darkness, it landed on an open coffin inside, and in that coffin, a body was standing upright. Its eyes were open, staring blankly into the darkness. Its mouth was moving, forming silent words, but no sound came out. The caretaker dropped his light and ran, never looking back. These weren't ghosts. This wasn't a haunting. This was something physical. The rumor of the walking dead wasn't just a story anymore. For the men who worked the soil, it was a terrifying reality. Today, those who are brave enough to visit Highgate, even on a bright sunny day, describe a deeply unsettling and uniform sensation. It's not just the gothic atmosphere or the crumbling graves. It's a physical feeling that descends upon you as you walk the paths. It often starts with a sudden, inexplicable dizziness, a sense of vertigo as if the very ground is unstable beneath your feet. This is frequently followed by a heavy pressure on the chest, a suffocating weight that makes it difficult to breathe. But the most pervasive feeling is the sense of being watched, of being counted. It's not the passive feeling of a spirit lingering nearby. It's an active, intelligent observation. You feel like you are being sized up, assessed by countless unseen eyes from the shadowed tombs. Technology seems to fail here. Visitors report their fully charged cameras and phones draining of battery in a matter of minutes. Digital cameras capture strange distortions, orbs, and figures that weren't visible to the naked eye. And perhaps the strangest phenomenon of all is the behavior of shadows. They don't always match the light. A shadow of a cross might be cast where there is only a round stone, or a long thin shadow will stretch out from a place where nothing is standing. Something in Highgate doesn't just haunt you. It interacts with you. It tracks you. By the time the authorities and the media began to seriously acknowledge the danger brewing within Highgate's walls, it was already too late. The strange occurrences had escalated beyond unsettling feelings and mysterious sightings. People had already stopped going missing quietly. The occasional lost pet or chilling local legend gave way to more concrete, terrifying events that could no longer be dismissed as folklore or exaggeration. The cemetery was earning a new, more sinister reputation, one that spread far beyond the local community. It was becoming known as a place where the boundary between life and death was not just thin, it was broken. A place where the dead were no longer passive residents in their final resting place. They were active, and they were waiting. This concludes part 1. Follow to uncover what happens when the dead refuse to stay buried. As fear spread across London, a new wave of visitors began to arrive at Highgate Cemetery. These weren't mourners or history buffs. They were self-proclaimed investigators, ghost hunters, and thrill seekers, drawn by the chilling rumors. They would scale the walls after dark, armed with flashlights and flimsy theories, eager to confront the unknown. But the cemetery had its own way of greeting them. Most didn't stay long. The oppressive silence and the feeling of being watched were enough to send them scrambling back over the walls they had just climbed. Some ran out screaming, their faces pale with a terror they couldn't articulate. They spoke of shadows that detached from tombstones, and figures that darted between the trees, always just at the edge of their vision. Others claimed they were chased, not by a person, but by something else. Something impossibly fast, moving through the overgrown paths with an unnatural agility. They described the sound of cracking twigs and rustling leaves right behind them, a pursuit that felt both intelligent and malevolent. One man, a self-styled paranormal expert, managed to stumble back to the main gate, collapsing in a heap. Before he lost consciousness, he whispered to the person who found him, "It followed me. It followed me right to the edge. But it couldn't cross." It was as if some invisible boundary held the darkness at bay, confining it within the cemetery's iron fences. As more of these trespassers shared their stories, the reports grew darker and more specific. The phenomena were no longer just fleeting shadows or strange noises. The cemetery itself seemed to be coming alive. People began to report seeing grave lids shifting, rising just an inch or two as if pushed from below, only to settle back into place a moment later with a soft, grinding sound. It was a subtle, terrifying movement, suggesting something was stirring beneath the earth. Mausoleums, with their grand marble facades and stained glass windows, became focal points of fear. Visitors would catch a glimpse of a face forming in the reflection on the glass, a pale, distorted visage that would stare back for a heartbeat before dissolving into nothing. It was never the visitor's own reflection. It was always someone else, something else, looking out from the other side. The whispers started then, soft, sibilant sounds that seemed to ride on the wind. But these weren't random noises. People heard their own names being called. A husband would hear his wife's voice, only to turn and find her standing silently 50 feet away, her eyes wide with confusion. A young woman heard her deceased father call her name, a sound that chilled her to the bone. It was intimate, personal, and deeply unsettling. The cemetery knew who they were. Then came the physical manifestations. People standing near the massive stone crypts would feel a sudden pressure against the wall from the inside. It felt like hands, cold and firm, pressing out against the stone, searching for a way through. There was a desperation to it, a silent, frantic plea, or a threat from those sealed within. One group of investigators, determined to capture definitive proof, set up audio recording equipment near a cluster of old, unmarked graves. That night, they recorded what they believed was the ultimate evidence, a low, rhythmic chanting. The language was guttural, ancient, and belonged to no known dialect on Earth. It rose and fell in a hypnotic, disturbing cadence. Elated, they packed up their gear, planning to return the next night to the exact same spot with more cameras. But when they came back, the path they had taken was gone. The familiar route was now a dense, impassable thicket of thorns and twisted trees, as if the cemetery had actively erased the way, walling off its secrets once more. The locals, the ones who have lived in the shadow of Highgate for generations, have their own theories. They don't talk about ghosts or spirits in the traditional sense. They speak of something far more unsettling. They say that certain graves in the cemetery are occupied twice, not by two different souls, but by bodies that refuse to accept their stillness. Bodies that still remember movement. They believe that death isn't the end for some of those buried there. It's just a change in their state of being. According to these local tales, if you stand at the edge of the cemetery at dusk and look into the deepening gloom, you might see them. Silhouettes begin to appear on the winding paths. But these aren't the paths for the living. They are overgrown, forgotten trails that lead deep into the heart of the cemetery, two places that no longer appear on any map. The figures stand perfectly still, like statues cloaked in shadow. They only appear when you look directly at them. The moment you glance away, even for a second, they move. When you look back, they're closer. They never move while being watched, a terrifying game of cat and mouse played across the decaying landscape. The stories always end with a warning. Those who are foolish or arrogant enough to try and follow these figures to chase the shadow that moves only when you're not looking, are never seen again. They simply vanish. The locals believe they aren't just lost, they're taken, led down those phantom paths to whatever lies at the cemetery's dark heart. Eventually, the stories became too numerous, the disappearances too frequent, the fear too palpable. The authorities had to act. Highgate Cemetery was partially closed to the public, the gates locked, and the walls reinforced. The official reason given was public safety, citing the risk of crumbling tombs and unstable ground. It was a logical, sensible explanation. But it wasn't the truth. The real reason the gates were sealed is buried in confidential reports and hushed conversations. It wasn't to protect the public from the cemetery's decay. It wasn't to deter vandals or criminals. It was to protect people from the cemetery itself. Because too many credible, terrified witnesses reported the same impossible thing. Highgate reacts to the living. It wasn't just a passive haunting. The evidence suggested something more sinister. The cemetery learns. It observes the patterns of visitors, the routes they take, the fears they bring with them. It adapts its methods. The moving shadows, the whispers of familiar names, the paths that disappear it, was all an intelligent, evolving response. The cemetery, or whatever force resides within it, does not like being watched. It does not like being investigated, and it has its own ways of ensuring its privacy. The closure was a desperate attempt to sever the connection, to stop feeding the thing that seemed to draw energy from the presence of the living. Beyond the official reports and the ghost stories, there is one final, chilling rumor. It's a belief whispered among those who know the cemetery's deepest lore. They say Highgate is not haunted by the spirits of the dead. It is inhabited by the dead who never accepted their burial. In this version of the tale, the elaborate tombs and graves are not final resting places. They are doorways. Some are entrances, leading down into the cold, silent earth. But others are exits. The whispers are not echoes of the past. They are invitations. The figures on the paths are not apparitions. They are gatekeepers. According to this belief, the cemetery doesn't trap souls within its walls. It releases them, and what comes out is not what went in. So, if you ever find yourself walking the permitted paths of Highgate Cemetery, surrounded by the silent, watching angels of stone, and you feel a sudden, overwhelming urge to leave, do not question it. Trust that instinct. Walk, don't run, towards the exit, and do not look back. Do not be tempted to return after dark, drawn by curiosity or a sense of bravado. Because the moment the dead notice you, the moment they whisper your name on the wind, they remember you, and they will be waiting. Some places are not abandoned. They are hungry. Thanks for watching Tales of the Dark. Subscribe to our channel, where every story is designed to give you a new nightmare.